Week 17 fantasy championship weekend. It's all been building to this. Now is not the time to make the wrong calls. Now is the time to make sure that you have full confidence in your starting lineup. And that's what we're going to go through today. I'm going to run through my favorite starts and sits at each position. I'm going to go through some of the guys that you just feel a little bit iffy about and that you might not want to be dealing with, maybe some options that we could talk about instead. I'm going to answer 100% of the questions that you drop into the chat in this episode and make sure that you feel good about your lineup heading into tonight. So starting off, we're going to start with some quarterback talk. And look, if you got questions, make sure you drop them and I will get to them after each position group. And the quarterbacks who I feel the best about, look, I'm not going to talk about Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, that level of quarterbacks. Obviously, Lamar Jackson, that's neither here nor there this week. But I'm not going to talk about Saquon Barkley. I'm not going to talk about starting Jamar Chase. Of course, you're going to start those guys. Of course, you feel good about some of those guys. But as we get a little bit further down, that's where your decisions are, and that's where I want to concentrate. So Trevor Lawrence, feel really good about him this week. The Colts rank 13th in schedule adjusted fantasy points per game. He's been the QB2 and QB1 in the last 2 weeks, which is just mind-blowing, really, when we consider how frustrating Trevor Lawrence has been for fantasy. He's thrown multiple touchdowns in 5 straight games, been a top 12 quarterback in 7 of his last 8 games. And it's really just wild the difference we're seeing from him now. He's rushed for 20-plus yards in 6 of his last 8 games, had 7 rushing touchdowns this season, just easily better numbers than we've seen him put up. And I think part of that you definitely have to say is the Liam Cohen influence. We saw Baker Mayfield last year have an incredible return in the rushing game, and now we're kind of seeing the same from Trevor Lawrence. The Colts have allowed 245-plus passing yards in 5 straight games. They gave up 5 passing touchdowns to the Niners. So I think Trevor Lawrence is going to have a really strong game here. Got Rich in the chat asking, Brock Purdy or Trevor Lawrence start 1 this week? It's Trevor Lawrence, my QB6. Brock Purdy down at QB9. I like Brock Purdy, and obviously you can see his name there. We'll talk about him in a couple of minutes, but I feel a little bit better about Trevor Lawrence. Now, I appreciate everybody here and in the chat. If you are here, drop a like on the channel and make sure you hit and subscribe. This channel absolutely comes to life in the off-season in terms of Dynasty content from Rich, best ball content from myself and Tyler. We love the offseason. Jacoby Brissett, the second quarterback who is a must-start for me. The Bengals have allowed the second most quarterback fantasy points this year. They rank 30th in EPA allowed. Brissett is coming off his worst game as a starter, particularly for fantasy points, when 16 of 31 for 203 yards against Atlanta, finished as the quarterback 23, which is definitely disappointing considering how reliable he's been. It was only the second time that he didn't manage multiple touchdowns. But this week against the Bengals, these are 2 very fast-paced teams, both are top 5 in terms of how quick they snap the ball. Arizona lead the league in pass rate over the last 4 weeks. Both teams want to pass the ball here, and I think that we see plenty of passing volume. Brock Purdy, third quarterback on this list, 5 touchdowns against the Colts, his best performance of the year in terms of fantasy, QB1 and QB4 in his last 2 games, 2 soft games, admittedly, against the likes of the Colts and the Titans. Now, the Bears' pass defense, it does rank 13th against the pass in EPA allowed, but 3 of the last 4 to play against Chicago have scored 17-plus points. Chicago have allowed 2 or more passing touchdowns in 8 games this year. And Brock Purdy, he's thrown for 8 in his last 2 games. He's also adding a little bit more on the ground, as we know he can do 55 rushing yards across those 2 games. So here, going up against the Bears, both teams have plenty to play for. And there's a lot of games where we're not seeing that this week. So if there's a situation where I can lock on to players who actually do have something to play for, then I'm going to take advantage of that. Tyler Shuck going up against Titans, back-to-back weeks as QB16, but he's been over 17 points in 4 of his last 5 games. Now, Tennessee, they rank 28th against the pass in EPA allowed. They've allowed the 3rd most quarterback fantasy points. New Orleans, when we get down to running backs, we will talk about Audric Estime, but they just don't have anybody good at the running back position. They're not able to get a consistent ground game going at the minute. Now, the Titans, they helped their numbers by going up against the woeful Chiefs last week. But in the 3 games before that, they allowed 27 points, 34 points, and 21 points to quarterbacks in 3 straight. I think Tyler Shuck's been one of the kind of nice stories of the season, been really reliable for fantasy. definitely somebody you can consider with confidence as a QB2 for Superflex leagues. And then rounding out the starts with Caleb Williams, he needs exactly 600 yards in these last 2 games to become the Bears' first ever quarterback to hit 4,000 passing yards. Now, the Niners, they are a pass funnel. They rank 15th against the run, but 23rd against the pass. Caleb Williams has run for 2 touchdowns in 3 straight games, rushed for 20 plus in 8 games this year. And we just saw the 49ers defense allowed Phillip Rivers to throw for 277 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, yes, very much into Caleb Williams this weekend. I think in general, that's another matchup where we want to be targeting it because the Bears and the 49ers both have plenty to play for. So let's move across to the sits. And if you got questions, do drop them in the chat. I'm going to answer them all as we go through this one. Justin Herbert going up against the Houston Texans. Now, the Texans have allowed 5 passing touchdowns in the last 2 games, but they've still only allowed 120-plus point game all year. And that was Jacoby Brissett a couple of weeks ago when he got up to 3 passing touchdowns. If you look across the course of the season, you're looking at performances against Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. The Texans had no problem shutting them both down. This is the number 1 pass defense in EPA allowed. I think that Justin Herbert's offensive line is going to be a real problem here. Now, we'll talk about the wide receiver situation a little bit later, but I think that Justin Herbert is going to have to get the ball out very fast to stand any chance in this one. CJ Stroud, another player that from that matchup that I'm a little bit wary of. I just don't think CJ Stroud is the kind of quarterback that you want to be playing in this situation. I am admittedly a bit of a CJ Stroud hater. He's had 2 top 10 performances all year. You look back across his last 4, QB 26, 18, QB 8, and QB 24. Now, as good as the Texans' pass defense is, the Chargers' pass defense is still fantastic. They rank number 5 in EPA allowed. They haven't allowed 20 points to an opponent since week 7. So, yeah, CJ Stroud, maybe you can make an argument in Superflex, but I just don't see him as a fantasy relevant quarterback more often than not. The Steelers quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, going up against the Browns. Now, I think that the Steelers can comfortably beat the Browns, even without DK Metcalf. But the Browns, they've allowed the 6th fewest quarterback fantasy points. They rank number 4th against the pass. I just think we see quite a conservative game script here. I think we see lots of gimmick plays to keep Myles Garrett away from Aaron Rodgers. I think that we're going to see a lot of stuff close to the line of scrimmage. And then it kind of comes down to whether somebody breaks it into a big run for whether it turns into a good performance or not. So, yeah, I'm trying to stay away from Aaron Rodgers here. Also try to stay away from Sam Darnold. Carolina ranked 26th in fantasy points allowed, which is actually better than the Seahawks, who are 25th. Since week 10, Darnold has 4 games with 1 or 0 passing touchdowns. This is 3 where he's had more. 7 games this year with 1 or fewer. Like Sam Darnold, it's either boom or bust completely. Week 15 against Tyler Shook was the only time in the last 5 that Carolina have allowed more than 15 points. So maybe we see an absolute blow-up performance from the Seahawks here, but I think it's kind of more suited to the running backs, so that's where I'll be playing this one. We're going to talk Geno Smith, but honestly, just drop those comments down in the chat if you've got conundrums, if you've got issues. I want to hear it. Now, I think there's people out there who would like to be playing Geno Smith going up against the Giants. The Giants have allowed the 4th most quarterback fantasy points, but there's no Brock Bowers for Geno Smith. Brock Bowers is on injured reserve, which absolutely stinks for fantasy football. But look, this is the name of the game. The Giants, they're tanking. Raiders, they're tanking. Neither team wants to win this game. If you need to start Geno Smith in Superflex, I need to start Geno Smith in Superflex having lost Lamar. I'll be using him in a championship game. Then that's probably fine. He's been QB 15 to 24 in each of his last 5 games. But it just doesn't feel particularly great. And I think that if you are going to do that, then you probably have to have some faith in guys like Trey Tucker, Michael Mayer to be fantasy relevant this weekend. So look, we're going to get to the running back position in a second. We're going to talk wide receivers. We're going to talk tight ends. But if you haven't already, 10 minutes into this video, I want to hear your questions. I want to hear your comments. I want to hear how I can help you. And all I need you to do is hit subscribe down below, because the Dynasty content, the rookie content, is all going to start flowing your way very soon. And best ball season, absolutely on the horizon. So at the running back position, Trevion Henderson, who looks to have cleared concussion protocol, one of the rare exceptions of a player leaving a game 1 week and then making it back for the next time. We don't have official confirmation on that, but he seemed to make it through training practice this week with a limited practice after having the red non-contact shirt removed. That's usually a pretty good indication. Now, the Patriots are heavy favorites against Brady Cook Jets, as you would expect. And the last 5 full games that Trevion Henderson has played, he's been over 60 rushing yards in all of them, been over 140 in 2 of them, including against the Jets in week 11 when he finished as the RB3 overall. The Jets have allowed the 7th highest explosive run rate since week 10. What do we expect Trevion Henderson to take advantage of? Exactly. Massive explosive runs. So I feel very confident in him here. Michael Carter going up against the Bengals. Already mentioned this is a game which I'm interested in. And yes, I'd rather be playing players from games where there's a lot to play for. And neither the Cardinals or the Bengals have anything but pride to play for. And I'm okay with Carter, though, because the Bengals have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to the running back position. They've allowed a league high 8.6% explosive run rate since week 10, 5.2 yards per carry in that time. Now, Michael Carter hasn't been magic for fantasy over the last 2 weeks, but he's had 25 rush attempts in his last 2 and been over 4.0 yards per carry in both. And he's also had 6 targets in that time. So it's not an insanely great play, but if you're looking for a flex, if you're looking for a deeper flex in a lot of leagues I play in where you might be starting 3 flex positions, then Michael Carter becomes a really good play. DeAndre Swift, I think this is the best version of DeAndre Swift that we've ever seen. Like, I've been a bit of a DeAndre Swift hater over the years, but it's been really consistent for him. He's been a top 36 running back in all but 1 week this year. There aren't too many running backs who can say that this season. And part of that has helped the Bears be the number 6 ranked offense in rushing EPA. Now, last week against the Packers was a bit disappointing, 58 yards. That was his worst game since week 12 against Steelers. But the Packers' run defense is pretty decent. It's by no means an elite unit, but they've really shined at certain points within the season, so it shouldn't have been that surprising, I guess. He's averaging over 16 rushing yards per game since week 13, which is really nice volume. I know there's plenty of us who wanted Kyle Monongai to be a thing, but DeAndre Swift is that thing currently, and I'm very much happy to take him here against the Niners, even if it's a little easier to pass on them than it is to run on them. And then the last start, reaching deeper, Audric Estime. Like, it wasn't great last week, finished as the RB44 in PPR leagues, had 5 rush attempts for 19 yards on the ground, 17 receiving yards on 3 catches last week. So it wasn't great, but I don't think they're going to move away from him, because Evan Hull had 4 rush attempts for 12 yards in week 15 and 5 for 3 in week 16. So those numbers don't suggest that we could see all of a sudden Evan Hull taking more of the work. Now, the Titans, they're definitely struggling on defense. They ranked 22nd against the run in EPA allowed. I think this game script stays quite comfortable. It shouldn't put Audric Estime out of it because of being in a deficit. I'm expecting both teams to score points. And I think that Estime, if you're looking for a running back in that kind of RB30 to RB36 range, RB, low end 40s, that's where he's probably going to end up. Now, in the sit, if you can afford to sit Breece Hall, I very much would be doing so. He's been the RB46, RB46, and RB38 in his last 3 games. Has rushed for over 3.5 yards per carry once in his last 5, and he hasn't been over 15 receiving yards in his last 4. Like, fine, if you can't get the rushing volume there, understandable, but you need to be getting the receiving work to make up for it. So I'm feeling really iffy about Brees Hall. The Patriots have struggled against the run lately. We saw last week against Ravens that the Ravens could run all over them when they wanted to, but then they made some poor decisions, and I'm totally over it. Totally over it. But I think they're still strong enough to give the Jets problems, particularly with the quarterback situation they have. Question in the chat: Philip Gainwell or Luther Burden? Let's get to that one first. So it does sound like Luther Burden's definitely going to play. I think here I'd be comfortable going with Gainwell. Gainwell, I've got as 31st player in my flex rankings. And then Burden, I mean, you're talking a significant gap down to kind of like the 90th player overall in my current rankings. And it's not to say that I hate Luther Burden. I think that Luther Burden can have a good week. Talked already about how the way to get the 49ers is through the pass game, but Gainwell's volume has been so good. I think this is another game where Aaron Rodgers is going to see it as an opportunity to help Kenneth Gainwell get that next contract. He's talked about it a few times. So yeah, I'll be sticking with Gainwell, and it's noteworthy the Browns' run defense has really been on the slide the last few weeks. And then at quarterback for this user, Justin Herbert or Malik Willis. Malik Willis is definitely not somebody I would start over Justin Herbert. So Justin Herbert's my QB 16. I've got Malik Willis down at QB 27. I think that Malik Willis is a good quarterback. I think he knows this LaFleur system and has been doing a good job for the Packers when called upon. The Ravens, in general, have been pretty reasonable against quarterback position. Obviously, last week did a miserable job against Drake May in terms of stopping him, gave up a lot of fantasy points to him. But in general, they've been pretty reasonable, and I would expect an okay performance from them against Malik Willis. I think it's more to be trying. I think this one's probably low scoring is what I'm getting at there. I hope that helped you, and if that did, drop us a like, please. Zach Charbonnet, the next running back who I'm looking to sit if I possibly can. This is, he doesn't have a touchdown in three of his last five, does have a touchdown in three of his last 5 games and been top 36 option in 4 of those. But he hasn't had double-digit carries in his last 3. He's rushed for 50-plus yards once in his last 6 games. And I think when you look at it like that, we're trusting a touchdown or bust bet here. And I just don't see this being a situation where going into fantasy championship weekend where I want to trust somebody like Zach Charbonnet, who's in and out of games, who isn't seeing massive volume, who isn't putting up efficient running numbers to get a touchdown. So if I can, I'm trying to stay away from him. Tony Pollard. So some of you might be thinking, okay, but he's had 100-plus rushing yards in 3 straight games, finished as RB2, RB11, RB29 in that time. But how often did you feel confident about him? How often did you feel like you could trust him? I don't know. I don't feel particularly great about him this week for the Titans. Like it's hard to trust what they're going to do. And going up against the Saints, the one thing that we've been able to say the Saints have done well all year is stop the run. They haven't given up a lot of fantasy points to the position there. They've got the number 3 ranked rush defense in EPA allowed. So, yeah, I mean, they haven't given up 80 or more running rush yards to a team's combined running back room in either of the last 2 games. So if I can, I'm staying away from Tony Pollard. Last up, Devin Singletary. Again, I've seen some people talking up Devin Singletary, saying that they feel optimistic about him for this weekend. Going up against the Raiders, who will have the 5th most running back fantasy points. They do, though, rank 11th in EPA allowed. They're quite good at slowing the game down. They just typically don't give up huge yardage to opponents. They just end up giving up touchdowns. And again, if you're betting on touchdowns, that seems a risky one. And I think the team's more likely to try and see a bit more from Tyrone Tracy this week, given that we know Devin Singletary is probably going to be off the team next year, whereas Tyrone Tracy is probably going to be sticking around for a little bit. And even though we expect Cam Scatterby to be back, I think the team probably wants to get more of an evaluation on Tracy. Look, we're going to move over to wide receiver position in a minute. Remember, I'm answering all your questions whilst I'm here. And if you're watching this on catching it on catch up instead of catching it live, drop them in the comments down below, and I promise you we will get an answer to you before kickoff tomorrow. So let's talk some wide receivers. And the first wide receiver who I think is a must start this week, Juwan Jennings. Since week 9, 31 receptions for 350 yards, 7 touchdowns, is the wide receiver 12 in PPR points since that point, wide receiver 15 in points per game. The Bears have allowed the third most wide receiver fantasy points this season. It's a game where I want to be putting a lot of my players from that game into it, lots to play for. Then Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle, possibly somebody who people might not have expected to see here. Wide receiver 11, 72, and 28 over the last 3 games. So it's not been massively comfortable. But that wide receiver 72 week, that came versus Pittsburgh with Tua. That was the game that got Tua benched. Now, Tampa Bay have struggled against the pass this year. They rank 19th in EPA allowed. Quinn Ewers targeted Jalen Waddle 9 times for a 33% target share last week. Plenty of faith that we're going to continue to see that kind of game plan with him this one. I'll get to those questions in the chat down below once I finish the starts for the wide receivers, but by all means, keep chucking them in and I absolutely will get to them. Jacoby Myers, already talked about how much I like Trevor Lawrence this week. I think that one is a situation we want to be capitalizing on. The Colts defense ranks 20th in EPA allowed, 4th most wide receiver fantasy points. I would expect that Brian Thomas sees more of Sauce Gardner than Jacoby Myers, who's going to kind of move across the middle of the field at times. Over the last 4 games, Jacoby Myers is averaging 7.7 targets per game. The Colts have allowed over 200 yards per game to teams opposing wide receivers. Like, it is absolutely a prime matchup. And Jacoby Myers, league winner. Love the sound of that. Lad McConkey. Now, the Texans defense, we talked about when talking about Justin Herbert. The Texans defense very good against the outside receivers. They're not as strong against the interior and the slot. Now, last time these two teams met was last year in the playoffs. Lad McConkey had 9 catches for 197 yards and a touchdown. Now, it's probably not going to be as good as that this time, but you can mitigate the offensive line issues for Justin Herbert with the quick passes, with the quick throws, getting them into the middle of the field to Lad McConkey, who's got that quick twitch ability. And I think that he can be really strong here. So let me just cover Stefon Diggs, and then I'll get to these questions in the chat, and then we'll roll on to the sits of the wide receiver position. Stefon Diggs. Diggs is the only man left right now. You've got Kayshon Boutte ruled out, Mac Hollins ruled out, and Mac Hollins has had some nice moments over the last few weeks. Like, it's not just been about all the performative stuff before the games, walking in half naked with no shoes. He's actually been out there and done well. But Stefon Diggs did fantastic last week against Baltimore. He was the wide receiver 7 in PPR formats, 9 catches for 138 yards. The Jets' pass defense is struggling so much at the minute. They rank 29th against pass in EPA allowed. They've allowed the 12th most wide receiver fantasy points, and the Patriots are such heavy favorites here. I think that you get a lot from Stefon Diggs early in this game, and then things might calm down in the second half as they lean heavily into the run. So let's get to a few of your questions. We've got Rory in the chat, start 2, Pollard, Jacobs, or Pierce. Like, it's definitely... Anytime that you start Alec Pierce at the minute, you've got to be shooting for upside, which is no bad thing. I think that ultimately I would be starting the 2 running backs here unless we get any kind of negative report about Josh Jacobs before tonight's game against the Ravens. Rory, I know you're a Ravens fan. I know that you'll know as much as me that the Ravens have been pretty good on the whole against the run lately, but I think that that's kind of an easy one to take. If you do have to start Alec Pierce, I'd start him ahead of Josh Jacobs. Like, that probably feels like the situation. Even though I don't love Tony Pollard, I'm a little bit worried that Josh Jacobs still ends up banged up and doesn't perform great tonight. Then Jimmy Giant, half PPR, pick 2, Kyron, Jacobs, Gainwell, Henderson. Now, I think I'd lean towards Kyron and Henderson here. Gainwell kind of fine, but not an ideal matchup. And then we mentioned it with Jacobs. How banged up is he? Is it a little bit tricky? I like Trevion Henderson plenty here. I've got Trevion Henderson as my RB18, Josh Jacobs as my RB19. So it's not a massive difference. But then Kyron Williams, I've got at RB12 going up against the Falcons, who are dead and buried, been poor against the run recently. I think that makes sense to start Kyron there. So I hope that helped you, Jimmy. Make sure you smash the like button and drop any more questions you've got. Rory with another one, Gino or Stefan Diggs. Now that's a fun one. Like, I definitely think you can start to kind of look at wide receivers at a certain point around there. But I'm still Geno Smith by about 30 to 40 spots in my Superflex. I think going up against the Giants, what are we talking about? What, 14 points, probably a comfortable floor for Geno this week. Now, that doesn't sound incredible, but if Stefan Diggs goes out and gets you 15 points, that's a very good day for him, and it's just a bit easier to achieve for Geno Smith. And then Kim asking, PPR need one for the flex. Jalen Waddle, Tony Pollard, or Luther Burden. I'm going Jalen Waddle there. Already just talked about this one. That Jalen Waddle last week had 9 targets, 33% target share. Really positive stuff. Quinn Ewers against the Bucs, who drive these kind of pass-heavy game scripts more often than not. I think I'm quite comfortable with that one. Okay, we'll do the sits, and then I will get to any more questions we've got before we move around to the tight end position. Who Hames, appreciate you. Good luck to you and your best ball sweats this weekend. So, starting of the sits, Christian Watson, the wide receiver rotation for the Packers, it's just nasty right now. You've got Dubs, you've got Jaden Reed both mixing in, and that's led to Christian Watson being wide receiver 62 and 85 over the last 2 weeks, which is definitely far from ideal at the point when things really matter more than ever. And I think we can't trust him as much when we don't have Jordan Love out there. Jordan Love throwing the ball downfield has been excellent this year. Malik Willis has only attempted one deep pass all season. His deep ball throw rate is 7%. This Christian Watson's 13%. I don't think that's the way that we're going to see the Packers try to attack the Ravens massively so today. So yeah, it's not one which I'd feel very good about whatsoever. Emeka Egbuka, since week 11, wide receiver 39, 47, 42, 71, 38, and 74. Like, you need to finish routinely as a top 36 wide receiver for us to be able to consider you a flex play. And if you're not doing that, then it becomes very difficult to trust whether somebody can be good. Now, before I get to, further into this one, plenty of people in the chat right now. I appreciate you. We don't just do this. We have loads going on in the Discord. You can get access to our full rankings. You can get access to Rich's Dynasty rankings, trade calculators. You get access to the rookie guide in the offseason. You get access to my weekly previews, the bets that I like each week. And to get that, you can sign up. But right now, I'm going to gift 5 memberships to the chat. You get one of those. Make sure that you jump in the Discord. If you don't find that link, just look on our page and I will make sure that you get a copy of it. You can come and jump into the Discord, find my best bets for the week, which will be up in the next hour, and many other things. You can leave as many start-sit decisions as you want in the Discord. Lots of people there helping you. Lots of exclusive leagues and content as well. So yeah, Emeka Egbuka. Snap shares of 64% and 56% in the last 2 with Godwins, Evans, and McMillan all healthy. Now, Miami doesn't have Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's been one of their better defenders this year, but it still just feels a really shaky bet. Khalil Shakir, the Eagles have been one of the best teams against slot receivers all year. Shakir has been wide receiver 50 or worse in 3 of his last 6 games, only finished top 30 once in that time. He rarely finds the end zone, and the way to attack the Eagles is not through the slot. So I'm staying away from Khalil Shakir this week. Howdy to you, Tyler. Appreciate you being here. Jerry Judy, look, he's had one good week since Shadeur took over. Week 15 versus the Titans. when he was wide receiver 15. Otherwise, he's been wide receiver 59 or worse every single week. 3 catches for 12 yards last week. Just can't get by on that. I've seen some people talking about, okay, well, the Steelers give up points. Their defense is a bit hit and miss. I just don't see it being a good matchup for Jerry Jeudy this week. Last wide receiver, before we move over to the tight end position, make sure you drop in any of those questions in the chat and I will get to them before we talk tight ends. No Andrew Thomas at left tackle for the Giants, which brings me a bit lower on Darius Slayton. Yes, they're going up against the Raiders, who aren't even trying. No Max Crosby. But I just think they'll still be able to generate enough of a pass rush that it's going to be hard for Jackson Dart to sit there and wait for Darius Slayton to get open downfield. So, yeah, I like Darius Slayton. I think he's a fun player, but I'm not starting him this weekend. 30 minutes into this video. Appreciate everybody who's here. It's a lot of fun. Appreciate everybody who is dropping questions. I will get to those tight ends in a second, but make sure you hit that subscribe button. Help me help you as we have this massive weekend ahead of us. So the tight end position, Harold Fannin, my God, what a season for the rookie. Harold Fannin's leading the Browns in targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns, and has this beautiful, beautiful matchup with the Steelers, who've allowed the 4th most tight end fantasy points in schedule adjusted points. Now, Fannin's season ranks among rookie tight ends the 7th best ever in targets, the 6th best in receptions, the 8th best in receiving yards, and in fantasy points, the 7th best. He is just an absolute dog right now. So, very much an easy start. Juwan Johnson, tight end 4 last week, 8 catches for 89 yards, scored over 9 points in all but 3 games this year. I still think people are just underrating how good Juwan Johnson has been. The Titans have allowed the 9th most fantasy points to the position. A really easy start for me. Colson Loveland, 5 or more targets in each of his last 5. 49ers ranked 13th in tight end fantasy points allowed. Keep coming back to this matchup because I think it's a really strong one for the Bears passing offense against the Niners' 23rd ranked passing defense. Darren Waller, 40 plus yards in 4 of his 6 full games this year, touchdowns in 4 of them also. Now, Tampa Bay allowed have allowed 6 tight end touchdowns in the last 5 games. They've allowed the 11th most fantasy points to the position. Just a really easy click. Like, give me Darren Waller ahead of any of these guys on the right-hand side right now. And then Brenton Strange, the Colts have allowed the 6th most tight end fantasy points. Brenton Strange had a really strong game against Denver, 5 for 39 and a touchdown. Not many tight ends have had massive success against the Broncos, so it was really positive to see him doing that. Talked already about how much I like Trevor Lawrence in this matchup, so very much here for Brenton Strange hype this week. Then, yeah, I'll be sitting Dallas Goedert. The Bills have just been fantastic against tight end position all season. They've allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to the position. Their top 7 pass defense. It's so much easier to run the ball on them. I think Saquon Barkley probably has a big week. Tyler Warren, it's just gone downhill slowly and steadily this year for Tyler Warren. It hasn't really clicked with Phillip Rivers. The wide receivers are feasting. The running backs are getting nice volume, but Tyler Warren isn't. So even though this matchup feels like one with plenty of fantasy points and the Jags have allowed the 8th most fantasy points to the position, I won't be starting him. Dalton Kincaid, his fitness has been a problem this year, and he's just not seeing the field enough for me to be able to trust him. He's not seeing enough. He's been very efficient, but he's not seeing enough volume to kind of make up for any dip in performance due to his injuries. And Dawson Knox has been pretty good over the last couple of games. Then Mark Andrews, look, I'm a Ravens fan. It pains me to say it, but I've seen some people talking about, okay, well, Snoop Huntley hyper-focused on Mark Andrews going back a few years and was really just helped Mark Andrews have his best fantasy season ever. But earlier on in the year, when he was in there, I didn't really see anything from us to think that that's going to be something that we're going to be getting a lot more of. And then Aronde Gadsden going up against Texans. Like, Gadsden had his moment this year, but the Texans have been pretty strong against the tight end position, haven't given up a lot of fantasy points to them. And I just think this game is going to run through Lad McConkey. So, Rory asking, if you were starting Geno in a championship game, would you sell Lamar for the 106 and Trevor Lawrence? I think I would. I mean, look, Rory, we're both Ravens fans. I know that one's a tricky one, but the matchup is elite for Trevor Lawrence this week. He's played incredible. And yeah, I'd be willing to go 106 and Trevor Lawrence for Lamar. See if you can squeeze a little bit more out of it, but definitely anything you can do to avoid starting Geno Smith sounds like a good idea. And then any love for AJ Barner. Like, look, I don't mind AJ Barner this week. Like, the Seahawks going up against Panthers, who've had their issues, they've on defense, but the Panthers have allowed the fewest tight end fantasy points this year. So it's been a little tricky for them. Like, it's a little tricky to say AJ Barner is going to go out there and have a monster matchup against them. But the Seahawks can be efficient, so I don't mind it. I think, let me just check where I've got him in my rankings. Yeah, I've got him tight end 20. I think I still struggle to start him. I couldn't start him ahead of like Dalton Kincaid or Ronda Gadsden. I do have him a couple of spots ahead of Mark Andrews. Oh, okay. So you were just using this public forum to send me trade offers. Appreciate that, Rory. Look, that is going to do it for this show. Appreciate everybody who's been hanging out in the chat. We've got Rich coming up in a matter of a couple of hours who will be doing the same show, but with his starts and sits. He'll be taking more of your questions and trying to make sure that we get you set up before the games kick off this evening. And if you missed this show and you're catching it on catch up, drop your comments down below and we absolutely guarantee we will get to every single one of them. And make sure you're hitting the subscribe button because we have a massive off season ahead of us. And one last point, if you got gifted one of the Fantasy Sanctuary memberships, jump in the Discord. If you can't find it, drop us a DM on Twitter and I will make sure you get the link because my God, there's a lot of fun happening there. Appreciate for everyone for hanging out. Good luck this weekend. Go and win it all.